It is a Thursday evening in the middle of July. The power has been out for an hour. You are standing in your kitchen with the last flashlight that still has batteries, and even that one is starting to go dim. The emergency radio on the counter is dead. You forgot to charge it because you always forget to charge it, and the batteries you bought at Walmart 3 months ago are already spent. $2.97 for an 8-pack, and they are gone before you needed them most. The electric bill last month was $162, and right now you do not have a single working watt to show for it. So you do what everybody does in the dark. You pick up your phone while it still has charge, and you start looking for answers. And that is when you see it. Some fellow on the internet bearing 2 scraps of metal in his yard, touching a meter to the wires, and pulling real voltage straight out of the ground. $8, he says. No outlet needed. Free power from dirt. And he is showing a number on that meter that looks like it means something. Now here is the thing. He is not entirely wrong. There is real electricity in that setup, and it is not a trick. Men were using this principle to run telegraph lines before the Civil War. The chemistry is as old as batteries themselves. But between the real number on that meter and the promises in that video title, there is a gap so wide most folks fall right through it, and either waste good money chasing a fantasy or walk away thinking the whole idea is nonsense. Both of those are wrong. There is a real working device buried in this old principle. There is also an honest limit to what it can do, and nobody making money on clicks has any reason to tell you where that limit sits. That is why I am here. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to build a real Earth battery, exactly what it costs, the honest number, not the title number, exactly what it can power, and exactly where the line falls between science and salesmanship. And I will do the arithmetic right here on the pad where you can check every figure yourself. I want to be straight with you before I go any further. There is real electricity in wet dirt. That is not a joke, and it is not a gimmick. 2 different metals buried in moist ground will produce a real measurable DC voltage, and Alexander Bain proved it in 1841. Telegraph men used it. The principle is as old as electrochemistry itself. So when somebody on the internet tells you a couple of scraps of metal and $8 worth of hardware will pull free power from the ground, they are not entirely lying. They are just leaving out the part that matters. Here is what they leave out. The voltage is real, the current is tiny, and the distance between a number on a meter and actual usable power, the kind that charges a phone, runs a radio, or keeps a light on, is so wide you could park a house in it. That gap is where honest people and dishonest people part company. So here is what I am going to do in this video. I am going to show you exactly how an Earth battery works and why it works. I am going to walk you through the build. 2 versions, one with salvage, one with new materials, and a dollar amount on every single piece. I am going to show you what it can honestly power and what it cannot. And I am going to do the arithmetic right here on the pad so you can see the truth for yourself. By the end of this, you will know more about dirt electricity than 90% of the people making videos about it, and you will not have been lied to once. Now let me tell you why I am the one sitting here. My name is Hal Perkins. I am 74 years old, raised in rural Missouri by parents who came through the Depression without owing any man a dime. My father was a mechanic. My mother could stretch a dollar until it screamed. I have spent my whole life fixing, building, and salvaging, and I keep the numbers on a legal pad because numbers settle arguments. My authority on this particular subject is not that I ran my house on a dirt battery. Nobody did. My authority is that I know an old principle when I see one. I know when a cheap method is real, and I know when somebody on the internet has stretched it past honesty. That is what I do here. Sort the truth from the waste and hand you the part that is worth keeping. Now, before I show you what to do, you need to understand why it works, because that tells you what to expect and what not to expect. And with this one, the expectations are everything. An Earth battery is what the chemistry people call a galvanic cell. That just means two different metals sitting in something wet that conducts ions. Here is the plain version. Zinc is an active metal. It wants to give up electrons. Copper is a more noble metal. It does not give them up as easily. When you bury a piece of zinc and a piece of copper in moist soil, a few feet apart, the wet earth between them acts like the liquid inside a regular battery. The zinc corrodes slowly over time. It sacrifices itself, and that corrosion pushes electrons through any wire you connect between the two metals. That flow of electrons is electricity, real, measurable, direct current electricity. In a textbook, with pure zinc and pure copper and the right solution, that reaction produces about 1.1 volts. In actual dirt, you will get less. Moisture matters. Clay-heavy, mineral-rich soil conducts better than dry sand. The Natural Resources Conservation Service will tell you the same thing about soil conductivity. It rises with moisture, soluble salts, and clay content. So the wetter and heavier your ground, the closer you get to that theoretical number. In dry, sandy, powdery soil, you may barely get a reading at all. Now here's the part nobody wants to say plainly. Voltage is only half the story. The other half is current, how many electrons actually flow per second. And in a soil cell, that current is small, very small. A modern educational example measures a lawn earth battery at about 0.6 of a volt and 0.2 of a milliamp. If you multiply those together, you get roughly 1/10 of a milliwatt. Write that down because it matters. 1/10 of a milliwatt. A single AA battery from the dollar store delivers about 2,000 milliwatts. That is the gap. The voltage looks promising on a meter. The power is a whisper. That does not mean it is useless. It means you have to be honest about the scale. And honesty about scale is exactly the thing the internet skips. If this is the kind of straight talk that keeps money in your pocket and nonsense out of your workshop, subscribe. I put one of these out every week. Old methods, real numbers, no hype. Now let me show you the build. Here is the honest materials list, and I am going to give you two versions, because the price difference between them tells a story all by itself. Build A is the salvage build, the one that gets closest to that $8 title. If you already have a scrap of copper pipe, an old copper fitting, a piece of copper flashing left over from a roof job, anything copper, and you have some galvanized nails or a scrap of galvanized sheet metal from the shop, your cash outlay is just the wire, the tape, the meter, and the LED. 25 feet of 14-gauge copper wire runs about $18.49. A roll of electrical tape is $2.27. A basic multimeter from Harbor Freight is $7.99. A single red LED, about 50 cents. That puts a salvage build at roughly $29.25. And if you already own the meter and have wire on hand, you are down close to $3. That is where the $8 claim lives. It is a salvage parts number and only a salvage parts number. Build B is the honest new retail build, and this is the one I want you to see because it tells you the real cost of copper. A 12 by 12 inch copper sheet from an online metal supplier runs $40.49. A 24 by 36 inch galvanized steel flat sheet from the hardware store is $19.98. Add the same wire at $18.49, tape at $2.27, the meter at $7.99, and the LED at 50 cents. Your new retail total is $89.72. Write that down. $89.72. That is a long way from $8, and anybody who tells you different is either using scrap or using your trust. Now let me tell you what to avoid before we start digging. Do not treat this like house power. Do not connect a homemade DC source to your household wiring, your breaker panel, or any outlet. If anything is ever going to feed into building wiring, that requires proper transfer equipment and qualified electrical work. That is not my opinion. That is OSHA and the National Fire Protection Association. Do not overspend on new copper roofing stock just because it looks impressive. Surface area matters, but retail copper cost will wreck the thrift case before you have turned one shovel of dirt. And do not pick a dry, sandy spot or a decorative mulch bed. This method wants persistent moisture and mineral contact, not pretty landscaping. Here is the build step by step. Step 1. Pick the wettest, honest location you have. Look for ground that stays damp, near a downspout outfall, the shady north side of the house, or that clay-heavy patch by the fence that never dries out by noon. If your whole yard is bone dry and sandy, this project becomes mostly a meter trick. Soil conductivity is the engine. No moisture, no meaningful current. Step 2. Use two unlike metals. Copper is your cathode, the noble side. For your anode, galvanized steel works fine because galvanizing is a zinc coating over steel, and zinc is more active than copper in the galvanic series. If you have true zinc sheet, use it. If you do not, galvanized steel is the sensible, low-cost stand-in, and it is what most folks will have in the shop. Step 3. Build one cell big enough to teach, not big enough to fantasize. Take one piece of copper and one piece of galvanized steel. Bury them separately, a few feet apart, with good soil contact all around. Bain's historical setup used plates about a meter apart. Start around 3 feet and experiment from there. What matters more than drama about spacing is this: good wet contact between the metal and the soil and enough surface area on the plates. A bigger plate in wet clay will outperform a small nail in dry sand every time. Step 4. Make the electrical connection simple and clean. Strip the insulation off both ends of your wire. Wrap one end tightly around the copper piece and the other tightly around the galvanized piece. Tape the exposed joint above grade, above the soil line, and keep the bare connection out of standing water. The wire is not optional. I know the title says no wiring needed, and what that honestly means is no outlet wiring, no household power. Every battery in the history of the world still needs a wire between the electrode and the load. That is just how circuits work. Step 5. Measure voltage first, current second. Set your multimeter to DC volts and touch the leads to the copper wire and the galvanized wire. A real build in reasonably wet soil should show you somewhere in the neighborhood of half a volt to about 1 volt. That is your open circuit voltage. Now carefully switch to the milliamp range and measure current. This is where the fantasy usually falls apart in a useful way. You will see the cell is real, and you will see it is small. That is the right emotional beat. Satisfaction first, exaggeration second. Step 6. Try the tiniest honest load. The right first load is a single basic red LED. Now a standard red LED wants about 2 volts forward and is rated for 20 milliamps. One raw earth cell is not going to light it by itself. You may need several cells wired in series just to get a dim glow. That is excellent because it teaches the viewer, it teaches you, the difference between voltage on a meter and power under load. If a single cell will not light one tiny LED, you can see for yourself what this means for charging a phone or running a radio. Step 7. If you want more voltage, add cells in series. Wire 3 to 6 separate pairs, each pair its own copper and galvanized plate buried in wet ground. In series, positive to negative. That will raise your measured voltage nicely. 3 cells might give you 2 volts or better. 6 might approach 4. But here is the line I want you to hear, and it is the line that earns trust. Series gives you more push, not necessarily more real working muscle. Voltage stacks. The current remains tiny unless the whole chemistry, the contact area, the moisture, the soil mineral content improves across every cell. Step 8. Now let me say something plain about the wrong approach, because there is a great deal of bad advice on this one. The internet version goes like this: bury 2 rods, see 1 volt on a meter, and leap straight to free home power, charge a 12-volt battery forever, no wiring needed. Let me do the arithmetic on that. A 12-volt lead-acid battery is normally charged at a constant current, constant voltage profile with float voltage around the high 13-volt range. In a narrow technical sense, yes, enough earth cells in series can exceed that voltage. But with earth battery currents living down in the microamp to fraction of a milliamp range, here is what you are actually looking at. A 12 amp hour battery charged at 0.2 of a milliamp, and that is generous for an earth cell, would take roughly 60,000 hours from empty. Write that down? 60,000 hours. That is about 6.8 years, and real charging losses would make it worse. That is not a power plan. That is a geology project. Step 9. So here is the honest best use case. This is a yard experiment. It is a low-power science demonstration. It is a way to compare soil conditions across your property. It is a beautiful way to teach a grandchild how electricity and corrosion actually work. It is possibly, in an optimized, well-maintained array, a trickle source into a tiny intermediate storage device for experimentation. It is not a replacement for a charger, a solar panel, a battery bank, or a generator. If you want dependable emergency energy for radios, lights, or phones, the honest next step is not more dirt. It is a small solar panel, a maintained battery, or a proper generator setup. I do not say that to kill the romance. I say it to size it correctly. And sizing things correctly is the whole reason folks come to this channel. Now let me tell you where this came from, because the history is real and it is worth knowing. Alexander Bain patented an earth battery application in 1841, and telegraph operators used earth return circuits through the middle of the 19th century. Large buried copper or galvanized plates in moist ground made a weak but usable current path for clocks, signaling, and telegraph work. That is documented. That is real. But what those systems powered was tiny signaling work, not modern household loads. The viewer who says this is old and proven is right. The viewer who says this means free home power is wrong. Both things can be true at once, and the person who can hold both in their head at the same time is the person who does not get fooled. You are not learning a new trick here. You are recovering an old one. And you are rescuing it from both the people who laugh at it as nonsense and the people who inflate it into a miracle. The truth is better than both. For keeping this going, the habit is simple. After a hard, dry spell, water the cell area lightly, just a garden hose for a minute, and recheck the meter. Inspect wire joints every few weeks for corrosion. Reseat any loose connections. Compare shady ground to sunny ground. Compare clay to sandy soil. Keep a little notebook. Treat it like a rain barrel or a compost pile, something that answers to attention, not something that runs itself. Be honest about what this does. The evidence that two unlike metals in moist soil produce real DC voltage is strong. That is settled chemistry. The evidence that arrays can power very low consumption demonstration loads in optimized setups is moderate. Research prototypes have done it. The evidence for household backup power is weak unless you narrow the claim way down to a trickle into an intermediate storage device over a very long time, and even then, the numbers are humbling. Where it fails, dry soil, poor contact, tiny electrodes, corroded wire joints, and any use case that asks for meaningful sustained current. If you want real backup power for an emergency, call that what it is and invest in the right equipment, solar, batteries, or a generator. Now, the safety. This is low voltage DC, and that makes it far safer than working with mains power. But safe is not the same as careless. Keep exposed wire splices insulated and out of walk paths where someone can trip. Do not run improvised outdoor wiring into the house through a cracked window in wet weather. Never connect a homemade source to household wiring or a breaker panel. I said it before and I will say it again because it matters. And if you experiment with charging any lead-acid battery from an earth array, do it in a ventilated area. Battery gas and charging limits are not optional, and a careless setup in an enclosed space is an honest hazard. Respect the chemistry in both directions. Now, I want to take a moment because here is where it all comes together. Look at what we have walked through. You have a real galvanic cell, zinc and copper in wet earth, producing real DC voltage. The chemistry is proven and more than 180 years old. You have two builds, a salvage version that can come in under $30 and a new retail version at $89.72 that shows you the honest cost of copper. You have a step-by-step from site selection to series wiring to the tiniest honest load test. And you have the scope, strong for voltage, moderate for tiny demonstrations, weak for anything resembling household backup. That is the whole picture, and it is a more interesting picture than the fairy tale. The honest math is plain. Let me put it on the pad. New retail build, copper sheet $40.49, galvanized sheet $19.98, 25 feet of wire $18.49, electrical tape $2.27, multimeter $7.99, LED 50 cents, total $89.72. Without the meter and wire, if you already own them, the fresh purchase hardware drops to $63.24. With salvaged copper and scrap galvanized metal, the cash outlay can fall near the title number D, but only then. Now, for comparison, a cheap 8-pack of AA alkaline batteries at Walmart is $2.97, about 37 cents a cell. So this Earth battery does not honestly beat disposable cells on simple economics if you buy all new copper just to build a tiny output device. The thrift case only becomes real when the metals are salvaged, already owned, or the whole thing is valued as a permanent zero fuel cost teaching rig. That is the honest gap. Here is the part I want you to sit with. This one is not a conspiracy. It is plainer than that. The dirt battery is real, and it is too weak for most modern appetites. Once families could buy dry cells for pennies, plug into the grid for a few dollars a month, and later pick up a little solar charger that produced far more usable current, the old soil cell stopped being a household necessity and slipped into the margins. Nobody had to coordinate that. Better watts won. But because the method slipped into the margins, most folks now make the opposite mistake. They either laugh at it as pure nonsense or they inflate it into a miracle. The truth is better than both. It works. It is cheap only when you use scrap. And it teaches you something permanent about how electricity and corrosion really behave. There is no money in teaching a person to understand a principle they can test in their own yard. There is money in selling them gadgets and panels and monthly plans. So the old method sits quiet the way quiet things do when nobody profits from speaking up. This was never really about replacing the power company with mud. It was about recovering an older household instinct. Before you buy the shiny answer, learn the principle underneath. Sometimes that principle really does save you serious money every month. And when it does, I will show you the figures right here. Sometimes, as with this one, the principle mainly saves you from being fooled by both the salesman who wants to sell you something expensive and the showman who wants to sell you something impossible. In my family's way of looking at things, that still counts as thrift. A man who understands why zinc corrodes before steel does not get talked into the wrong anode on his water heater. A man who knows what wet soil can and cannot do with two metals does not waste $100 chasing a YouTube fantasy and does not dismiss a real piece of old science either. Both of those savings are real. The first one you can count on the pad, the second one you carry in your head. Here is what I want you to do. Tonight, gather a multimeter, one piece of copper, pipe scrap, a fitting, a piece of flashing, whatever you have, and one piece of galvanized steel and pick the dampest patch of ground you can find. This week, build one cell, measure volts and milliamps, and log the reading. Then check it again after a rain and again after a dry spell. This month, if the experiment has you interested, build a 3-cell series string and try the smallest honest load. A dim LED glow would be a genuine success. This season, decide whether the real lesson was keep this as a yard science rig, or move on to solar if I want practical backup power? Either answer is fine. One teaches you patience, the other teaches you scale. Both of them teach you the truth, and the truth is always cheaper than a lie in the long run. Now, two things before I go. First, have you ever built one of these or measured the ground in your own yard and been surprised by what you found? And second, if your father, your grandfather, or an old radio man you knew had a shop trick for pulling a little use out of almost nothing, wiring, batteries, a rig made from scrap that did a job it had no business doing, write it down below. These little inherited methods disappear when nobody bothers to put them in words, and I read every single one. Next time, same principle, different problem. The old low-cost ways people really did light a room or keep food cool when the power was gone. The methods that scale better than a dirt battery ever will. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Until then, find your copper, find your zinc, find your wet ground, measure what is real, and stop believing anyone who tells you dirt will run your house. That is how the careful old folks sorted fact from foolishness without spending a dime they did not have to. That is how it is still done in any home that remembers.